In this movie, we're going to make a real request from the Sunlight Congress API and use it on our page. So here we are. I can type in a zip code, a totally fake zip code, and I'm putting in a message. So let's make a real request. To do that, we're going to need to know what to make a request of. So let's take a look at the Sunlight page. So I'm here on the Sunlight Congress API page. Every service is going to be different. Sunlight has good documentation. Not everyone will. But here, we're looking for some methods that we can call. So we're looking to find the location of our legislators in the area that we're interested in. And Sunlight has a legislators/locate method. And we can use it to find our reps or our senators by latitude and longitude or zip code. Great. So let's look at that page. So as it says, we need an API key. And then it shows us an example of what a request can look like. We just call this URL /legislators/locate, and then we pass in the parameters by which we want to search. We're not using latitude and longitude. We're going to use the zip code. Now, they do recommend against using zip codes for this purpose because it's not as precise as some other methods. Apparently, there are some zip codes that overlap states, but that's what we're going to use for the purposes of this relatively simple demonstration. So let's take a look at our code and see how to actually implement this. So I'm going to scroll down to my JavaScript. Everything is the same as it was before. I've also added a bunch more code inside a comment. We're going to take this apart piece by piece, and I'm doing it this way just to save some typing. So the first thing that we need is where to make the request. So I'm going to pull this out. Now, as you saw over on the Sunlight page, this is the format of a request. And there's different ways that you can do this using the methods built into jQuery. We're going to be using this one, getJSON. This is another shortcut method built into jQuery that handles a bunch of stuff from the built-in AJAX method, and it's specific for getting JSON from someplace else and then processing it. And it takes a few arguments. First of all, it takes the request URL, and then an optional second parameter is the keys and values that you want to pass in. Now, as we saw over here, you can also phrase the request like this, adding these parameters that you want to send directly into the URL. That will work, but here's the tricky part. Because we're making a request from an external service that doesn't belong to us, we need to attach this little bit on the end. Callback =?. This will signal to jQuery and to Sunlight that we want the data returned in JSON-P format. Why they don't tell you this by default right on the page, I don't know, because there are very few services that are probably calling this from their own servers. But when you're using this getJSON method, adding this callback =? On the end is the little trick that you need to make sure that you make the request in a format that will actually work. So because we have to attach this on the end, I think it's a little bit cleaner to use this second argument to pass in a JavaScript object of the parameters that we want to pass in. This works the same as passing them in directly in the URL. I just think it reads a little nicer in the code. So let's pull this out. So I have the request URL and then the things that I want to pass in, which is my API key and my zip code. And now the final piece is the callback, which includes what to do with the data once we have it. So this little function is enough to request the data and then see if we're getting anything back using the console.log function. So let's switch back over and reload this page. I'm going to type in a real zip code from Illinois and then look up the representatives. Okay, so we can't see anything here, but if I load up the console, I can see I have an object sitting here. Let's open it up. So I have a count of 4, and then I have a results array. And I can inspect this right here in the console. Wow, okay, there's a lot of data that came back. So I can see that each of these objects has a chamber, which for this representative is set to House. So that's a congressperson. The second one, also House, another congressperson. Here we go. Now I'm looking at the senators. And there are 2 of these, of course. So what I'm going to need to do is look into this object and then find the pieces of the results array whose chamber is Senate. But as you can see, the way this works is I make the request and then I have this callback function. And if I pass in an argument, which I'm calling data in this case, you can call it anything you want, I then have the data that I can process however I want to. In this case, I'm going to use it to update the page. So let's grab a big block. This is going to save a lot of typing. I'll paste that in. So this is quite a few lines, but let's break it down. So I'm looking to see if there are any results whatsoever. Inspecting this, I can see that there is a results key and it has an array in there. This test just makes sure that I do, in fact, have something. So I'm checking that that exists, and I know that this correctly formed response is an array, so I can check to make sure that its length is at least 0. Generally speaking, it's going to be 4 or more. And so now I start building up my response that I'm going to insert into the results area. So here are your senators. And now I'm using this jQuery each function, which is a generalized iterator for dealing with an array, an object, anything where you might want to do something with each piece of an array or an object. So in this case, I'm iterating over the 4 elements of this array. I could do this with a for loop, but this jQuery method is quite nice and readable, I think. So each takes first the thing that you want to iterate over, and then another callback. And the arguments to that are the index, which I can then use inside the callback if I want to refer to things by number, and the value. So in this case, my I would be set to 0, 1, 2, and 3 each time through the loop, and then rep is set to this object that has all these properties. So I'm checking first to see if the chamber matches Senate. And I'm throwing in 2 lowercase just to make sure that this match will always work, regardless of whether the data uses lowercase or uppercase or title case or whatever. This will always match as long as the right word is in there. And then I'm adding on to my senators, paragraph tag, and then a link, which refers to the contact form, which is right here in the data. And then I'm building up the full name of the representative using the first and last names. Now, of course, this one is House. Don't worry about that. All the data are the same regardless of the chamber. And then I'm closing the link and closing the paragraph. And so after I go through all of these and build up just the 2 senators, I'm saying please write to them. And then finally, updating this area. I'm going to remove this old one so we only update it once. And then if this didn't work, if we don't get any actual data, I'm just returning an error message. So let's save this and try it out. Try a different zip code and look up my reps. And here we are. So we went out to the Sunlight Congress API, looked up the representatives for the zip code, and they came back with links to their contact forms. If I put in a garbage zip code, I get an error message. Works great. So to recap, we just need to make sure that we have a few pieces in place. An API key if necessary, requesting the right URL, which we can find out from the API, and making sure to tack on the callback equals question mark, little piece on the end there to make sure that we request data in the format of JSON-P. And then we just use getJSON, pass in the parameters, and then process the data. There might be more advanced problems that you're going to need to solve using the built-in AJAX method, but getJSON will take you a long way there with a lot of different services. So that's how you can use JSON data from an external service to update your own web application.